The House of the Spirits, Isabel Allende. How much does a man live after all? Does he live 1,000 days, or one only? For a week, or for several centuries? How long does a man spend dying? What does it mean to say forever? Pablo Neruda. Chapter 1. Rosa the Beautiful. Barabbas came to us by sea, the child Clara wrote in her delicate calligraphy. She was already in the habit of writing down important matters, and afterward, when she was mute, she also recorded trivialities, never suspecting that 50 years later I would use her notebooks to reclaim the past and overcome terrors of my own. Barabbas arrived on a Holy Thursday. He was in a despicable cage, caked with his own excrement and urine, and had the look of a helpless, utterly defenceless prisoner. But the regal carriage of his head and the size of his frame bespoke the legendary giant he would become. It was a bland autumnal day that gave no hint of the events that the child would record, which took place during the noon mass in the parish of St. Sebastian, with her whole family in attendance. As a sign of mourning, the statues of the saints were shrouded in purple robes that the pious ladies of the congregation unpacked and dusted off once a year from a cupboard in the sacristy. Beneath these funereal sheets, the celestial retinue resembled nothing so much as a roomful of furniture awaiting movers, an impression that the candles, the incense, and the soft moans of the organ were powerless to counteract. Terrifying dark bundles loomed where the life-size saints had stood, each with its influenza-pale expression, its elaborate wig woven from the hair of someone long dead, its rubies, pearls, and emeralds of painted glass, and the rich gown of a Florentine aristocrat. The only one whose appearance was enhanced by mourning was the church's patron saint Sebastian, for during Holy Week the faithful were spared the sight of that body, twisted in the most indecent posture, pierced by arrows, and dripping with blood and tears like a suffering homosexual, whose wounds, kept miraculously fresh by Father Estribro's brush, made Clara tremble with disgust. It was a long week of penitence and fasting, during which there were no card games and no music that might lead to lust or abandon, and within the limits of possibility, the strictest sadness and chastity were observed, even though it was precisely at this time that the forked tail of the devil pricked most insistently at Catholic flesh. The fast consisted of soft puff pastries, delicious vegetarian dishes, spongy tortillas, and enormous cheeses from the countryside, with which each family commemorated the Passion of the Lord, taking every precaution not to touch the least morsel of meat or fish on pain of excommunication, as Father Estribro had repeatedly made clear. No one had ever dared to disobey him. The priest was blessed with a long, incriminating finger, which he used to point out sinners in public, and a tongue well schooled in arousing emotions. "There's the thief who steals from the collection box," he shouted from the pulpit as he pointed to a gentleman who was busying himself with the lint on his lapel so as to not show his face. "There's the shameless hussy who prostitutes herself down by the docks," he accused Donna Esther Truber, disabled by arthritis and a devotee of the Virgin del Carmen, who opened her eyes wide, not knowing the meaning of the word or where the docks were. Repent, sinners, foul carrion, unworthy of the Lord's great sacrifice, do penance. Carried away by vocational zeal, the priest had all he could do to avoid openly disobeying the instructions of his ecclesiastical superiors, who, shaken by the winds of modernism, were opposed to hair shirts and flagellation. He was a firm believer in the value of a good thrashing to vanquish the weakness of the soul, and was famous for his unrestrained oratory. The faithful followed him from parish to parish, sweating as he described the torments of the damned in hell, the bodies ripped apart by various ingenious torture apparatus, the eternal flames, the hooks that pierced the male member, the disgusting reptiles that crept up female orifices, and the myriad of other sufferings he wove into his sermons to strike the fear of God into the hearts of his parishioners. Even Satan was described in his most intimate perversions in the Galician accents of this priest, whose mission in this world was to rouse the conscience of his indolent Creole flock. Severo del Val was an atheist and a Mason, but he had political ambitions and could not allow himself the luxury of missing the most heavily attended Mass on Sundays and feast days, when everyone would have a chance to see him. His wife, Nivea, preferred to deal with God without the benefit of intermediaries. She had a deep distrust of cassocks and was bored by descriptions of heaven, purgatory and hell, but she shared her husband's parliamentary ambitions, hoping that if he won a seat in Congress, she would finally secure the vote for women, for which she had fought for the past 10 years, permitting none of her numerous pregnancies to get in her way. On this Holy Thursday, Father Restrebro had led his audience to the limits of their endurance with his apocalyptic visions, and Nivea was beginning to feel dizzy. She wondered if she was pregnant again. Despite cleansings with vinegar and spongings with gall, she had given birth to 15 children, of whom 11 were still alive. But she had good reason to suppose that she was settling into maturity, because her daughter Clara, the youngest of her children, was now 10. It seemed that the force of her astonishing fertility had finally begun to ebb. She was able to attribute her present discomfort to Father Restrebro, when he pointed at her to illustrate a point about the Pharisees, who had tried to legalize bastards and civil marriage, thereby dismembering the family, the fatherland, private property, and the church, and putting women on an equal footing with men. This in open defiance of the law of God, which was most explicit on the issue.